The night Karen Whitmore called 5 police cars to surround my home officers with hands on their weapons, all because I dared to move out of her HOA kingdom. That's when everything changed. She thought she had me cornered, thought she'd finally won her twisted war against a widower, just trying to honor his dead wife's dream. But Karen made one fatal mistake. She didn't know who was inside that 5th patrol car. Follow my story to the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has gone. The for sale sign went into Robert Thompson's front lawn at 8:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning that smelled like fresh basil and possibility. He'd hammered it in himself, each strike echoing across the quiet cul-de-sac of Willowbrook Estates, and with every blow he felt Lisa's presence beside him, her phantom hand on his shoulder, approving. 3 years. 3 years since the cancer had taken her, and he was finally ready to move forward with their dream. The hospital contract papers sat on his kitchen counter, still crisp from the lawyer's office. St. Mary's Hospital chain wanted him as their exclusive organic vegetable supplier. 5 years guaranteed. Enough money to expand the small farm, to build the greenhouse Lisa had sketched on napkins during her chemo sessions, to create something that would outlive them both. Robert stood back, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool morning air. At 58, his body showed the wear of decades working, the earth-calloused hands, sun-weathered skin, a slight stoop from years of bending over plants. But his eyes? Those were still young, still burning with the purpose Lisa had ignited in him. "This is it, baby," he whispered to the morning air. "We're really doing it." The basil plant by the front door seemed to rustle in response. Lisa's basil. She'd planted it 2 weeks before she died, dragging herself from her hospice bed with a determination that had made the nurses cry. "Something has to keep growing when I'm gone," she'd said, dirt under her fingernails, triumph in her dying eyes. That plant had survived 3 winters, countless HOA complaints, and even an accidental trampling by a delivery truck. It was more than a plant now. It was a promise. A green, fragrant reminder that some things refuse to die. Robert had just turned toward the house when he saw her. Karen Whitmore materialized from her colonial across the street like smoke from a toxic fire. 52 years old, blonde hair styled to perfection, wearing designer workout clothes that had never seen a drop of actual sweat. Her lips were painted the color of fresh blood, twisted into what she probably thought was a friendly smile. "Robert," she called out, her voice dripping with artificial sweetener, "surely you're not thinking of leaving our beautiful community?" He straightened, forcing his own smile. 8 years. 8 years Karen had ruled Willowbrook's HOA like a medieval queen, and for 8 years he'd managed to mostly stay under her radar, until the garden incident 2 years ago. "Morning, Karen. Yes, I got an opportunity I can't pass up. Hospital contract for my vegetables." Her eyes, blue like antifreeze, flickered with something Robert couldn't quite identify. "How wonderful for you, though I do hope you've reviewed Section 12 of our bylaws about property transfers." "I wasn't aware there were special requirements for selling your own home." Karen's laugh tinkled like breaking glass. "Oh, Robert, there are always requirements. That's what keeps Willowbrook special. That's what maintains our property values." She took a step closer, and Robert caught a whiff of her perfume, expensive and oppressive. "You know, not everyone is suited for the farming life. Sometimes it's better to bloom where you're planted, don't you think?" The irony of her using a gardening metaphor wasn't lost on him. This was the same woman who'd tried to ban vegetable gardens from front yards 2 years ago, calling them agricultural eyesores and magnets for vermin. Robert had fought that ban, had stood up in meeting after meeting with documentation proving that well-maintained gardens actually increase property values. He'd won too. The first person to successfully challenge one of Karen's edicts in her entire reign. She'd smiled when the vote went against her, had even shaken his hand, but her eyes had promised retribution. "I appreciate your concern, Karen, but the decision's made. The realtor will be showing the house starting Thursday." Thursday. She repeated the word like she was tasting wine. "That's very soon indeed." Her gaze drifted to his front garden, where tomatoes climbed handmade trellises and squash spread across mulched beds. "I suppose you'll be taking all of this with you." "The vegetables, yes. The improvements stay with the property. Should be a selling point." Karen's non-committal hum carried more threat than a scream. Well, I should let you get back to your farming. We'll chat more later, I'm sure. After all, the HOA needs to approve any significant changes to properties, sales included. Robert felt his jaw tighten. The HOA doesn't have the authority to block home sales, Karen. Doesn't it? Her smile widened, showing too many teeth. I suppose we'll find out. Have a blessed day, Robert. She turned and walked back across the street, her hips swaying with calculated precision. Robert watched her go, unease settling in his stomach like bad milk. He'd lived in Willowbrook for 10 years, had seen Karen destroy people for infractions as minor as parking violations and grass height. But this felt different. This felt personal. Inside her house, Karen stood at her window, watching Robert water his vegetables. Her husband, Richard, sat in his recliner, invisible behind the Wall Street Journal, as he'd been for the last 15 years of their marriage. He'd learned long ago that invisibility was the key to survival in Karen Whitmore's kingdom. He's leaving, she said to the window. Richard grunted, not looking up. Robert Thompson, the vegetable farmer. He's selling his house. Another grunt. Karen's fingers tightened on the windowsill. He embarrassed me, Richard, in front of everyone, made me look weak. You won that lawsuit against the Hendersons last month, Richard offered, still hidden behind newsprint. And the Chens paid their fine without protest. That's not the point. Karen's voice had dropped to a whisper that would have made Richard's blood run cold if he'd been paying attention. Robert Thompson challenged my authority, publicly, and won. Now he thinks he can just leave. Just walk away after undermining everything I've built here. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through her contacts until she found the name she wanted. Mike Stevens. Her newest ally, a 48-year-old ex-military man with a chip on his shoulder and a desperate need for purpose. She'd met him at a coffee shop 3 weeks ago, had recognized the hungry look in his eyes, the same look she saw in her mirror every morning. Mike, it's Karen. I have a job for you. Robert spent the rest of the morning tending his garden, trying to shake the feeling that crosshairs had just been painted on his back. He picked tomatoes for the farmer's market, their weight familiar in his hands. Each one was perfect, grown without chemicals, nurtured with the same patience Lisa had shown during her 3-year battle with cancer. Food is medicine, she used to say, even when she could barely keep anything down. Clean food grown with love. That's what people need. She'd been a pediatric nurse for 20 years before the diagnosis, had seen too many sick kids, too many preventable illnesses. The garden had started as her project, a way to provide fresh vegetables to families who couldn't afford them. After she died, Robert had kept it going, expanding it until his entire front and backyards were productive gardens. The neighbors loved it. Well, most of them. He gave away more than he sold, left baskets of free produce at the end of his driveway every Sunday. Mrs. Chen from 2 houses down credited his tomatoes with helping her grandson's eczema. The Patel family had learned to cook with vegetables they'd never seen before. Even grumpy Mr. Anderson had admitted the neighborhood looked better with gardens than grass, but Karen had never forgiven him for the public challenge to her authority. His phone buzzed. Text from Maria Rodriguez, who owned the bakery downtown and served on the HOA board. Robert, need to talk. Not over phone. Can you meet at the shop around 2 inches? He texted back a confirmation, then noticed something odd. A white van had parked across the street just down from Karen's house. Tinted windows, no company markings. It hadn't been there an hour ago. As he watched, the driver's window cracked open. A camera lens poked out, pointed directly at his house. Click, click, click. The sound carried in the quiet morning air. Robert pulled out his own phone, taking a photo of the van, making sure to capture the license plate. Then he went back to his gardening, pretending not to notice. But his movements were more deliberate now, more careful. Every few minutes he heard that clicking sound. By noon, the van had moved 3 times each position, offering a different angle of his property. The driver never got out, never showed his face, just sat there watching, photographing, documenting. Nathan called just after lunch. Hey, Dad, how'd the signing go? Robert smiled at his son's voice. Nathan was 31, a police officer in Riverside, 3 hours away. He'd gotten his mother's compassion and his father's stubbornness, a combination that made him excellent at his job. Good. Great, actually. I should close in about 6 weeks if everything goes smooth. That's fantastic. Mom would be so proud. Yeah. Robert's voice caught slightly. Yeah, she would. You okay? You sound weird. Robert glanced at the van now parked directly across from his driveway. Just HOA nonsense. You know how it is. Karen's still giving you trouble. When isn't she? Nathan's voice hardened. Dad, if she escalates. I can handle Karen Whitmore. I know you can, but I'm off this weekend. Thought I might come visit, help you start packing. You don't have to. I want to. Besides, been too long since I've had your tomatoes. The store-bought ones taste like disappointment. Robert laughed, the first genuine laugh all day. Saturday, then. I'll make your mother's marinara. Looking forward to it. And Dad, document everything with Karen. Everything. Trust me on this. After they hung up, Robert stood in his kitchen, looking at the photos of Lisa that covered the refrigerator. Their wedding. Their trips. Her last birthday bald from chemo but smiling like she'd won the lottery. In the last photo taken 2 weeks before she died, she stood in the garden, leaning on Robert, surrounded by the vegetables she'd never get to harvest. I'm trying, baby, he whispered, but this might get ugly. He drove to Maria's bakery at 2, noting that the white van followed him at a distance. Maria's shop, Flower Power, sat on the corner of Main and 3rd, a cheerful yellow building that always smelled like heaven. She'd opened it 5 years ago after her youngest started high school. It had become the unofficial heart of the neighborhood, the place where gossip was traded along with cookies. Maria met him at the back door, flower in her dark hair, worry in her brown eyes. She was 43, tough as nails from raising 4 kids while her husband worked double shifts, but right now she looked scared. Thanks for coming. She led him to a small office behind the kitchen, shutting the door firmly. Coffee. Please. She poured 2 cups, her hands shaking slightly. Robert, I need to tell you something about Karen, but if she finds out I talked to you, she won't hear it from me. Maria sat down, cradling her coffee like a lifeline. 2 years ago, before your garden lawsuit, she tried to shut me down, said I was running an illegal commercial kitchen in a residential zone. But you're not residential. You're zoned commercial. Exactly, but she had a friend in the permit office. They revoked my license based on a technicality. Cost me $5,000 in lawyer fees to get it back. $5,000 I didn't have. Maria's voice dropped. I had to borrow from my brother, still paying him back. Why didn't you say anything? Because she made it clear what would happen if I did. Maria pulled out her phone, scrolled to an old text message. This is from her personal number. Robert read the message, his blood chilling. Maria's so glad we could resolve our little misunderstanding. Remember, good neighbors keep each other's secrets. Would hate for immigration to get an anonymous tip about your husband's cousins. Jesus. Her husband's cousins are here legally, Maria continued. Have been for years. But an investigation would have destroyed their business even if it found nothing. This is blackmail. This is Karen. Maria leaned forward. Robert, she's done this to at least 6 families I know of. The Washingtons moved after she reported them to child services for letting their kids play unsupervised. The complaint was dismissed, but the damage was done. The Lynns sold their house for 30% under market value after she made their lives hell with daily violations. Why are you telling me this now? Because you're getting out, and because... Maria hesitated, then pulled out a folder. I've been documenting everything, every illegal fine, every family she's harassed, every abuse of power. I was too scared to use it before, but if she comes after you, maybe together. The bakery's front door chimed. Maria went pale. Wait here, she whispered, stepping out to the front. Robert heard Karen's voice, sweet as poison. Maria, darling, I need 24 cupcakes for the HOA meeting tomorrow. The chocolate ones. Everyone loves your chocolate ones. Of course, Karen. 24. Wonderful. Oh, and Maria, I drove by this morning and noticed your delivery truck was parked out front for quite a while. You know we have that 2-hour limit for commercial vehicles in residential areas. But I'm not in a residential. The HOA boundaries extend to all businesses owned by residents, dear. Didn't you read the amended bylaws? I'll overlook it this time, but do be more careful. Robert heard footsteps approaching the office. He grabbed a broom pretending to sweep as Karen poked her head in. Robert! What a surprise, helping Maria out. Just being neighborly. Karen's smile could have frozen hell. How wonderful. Good neighbors are so important, aren't they? They watch out for each other. They know what everyone's up to. Her eyes bored into his. They know everything. She left without another word. Maria stood frozen in the doorway, trembling. She knows, Maria whispered. She knows I talked to you. That evening, Robert found the first violation notice stuck to his door. Bright orange, impossible to miss. Violation of HOA Ordinance, March 7th, 12. Commercial vehicle parked in residential driveway exceeding 2-hour limit. Fine $500 due within 48 hours or additional penalties will apply. His produce truck had been in his own driveway for 3 hours while he loaded vegetables for the farmer's market. A rule that had never been enforced in the 10 years he'd lived there. He called the HOA office, knowing Karen would answer. She always answered. Willowbrook Homeowners Association, Karen Whitmore speaking. Karen, this violation is ridiculous. I was loading vegetables for donation to the food bank. Donations don't exempt you from regulations, Robert. Rules are rules. This rule has never been enforced. Well, perhaps it should have been. We've been too lax, I think. Too permissive. That's going to change. Robert gripped the phone tighter. This is about me selling the house, isn't it? I have no idea what you mean. Is there anything else I have a neighborhood to run? She hung up. Robert stood in his kitchen violation notice in hand and made a decision. He pulled out his phone and started recording. Day 1 of what I suspect will be HOA harassment. Received first violation notice for a rule never previously enforced. He documented everything, the time, the date, the exact nature of the violation. Then he photographed the notice, his truck, and the timestamp on his security camera showing how long the truck had actually been there. Nathan had taught him well, evidence wins cases, Dad, always. As darkness fell, Robert noticed the white van was still there, still watching. He could see the faint glow of a cigarette inside. Whoever Mike Stevens was, he was settling in for a long surveillance. Robert closed his blinds, but not before giving the van a cheerful wave. Let them watch. Let them document. He had nothing to hide. But as he lay in bed that night listening to the sounds of suburbia sprinklers' distant dogs, the hum of air conditioners, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Karen Whitmore didn't just want him gone. She wanted him destroyed. The next morning brought a parade of violations. 3 more orange notices, each more ridiculous than the last. Grass height variation exceeding acceptable parameters. His lawn was different heights where it met the garden beds. Unauthorized fauna attraction bird feeders. Unapproved agricultural equipment visible from street his wheelbarrow. Total fines, $2,000. Robert called his realtor Janet Morrison, a tough woman in her 60s who'd been selling houses since Karen was in middle school. Janet, we might have a problem. Let me guess. Karen Whitmore? How did you choose? Honey, I've been dealing with that woman for 8 years. She's scared off 3 of my buyers with her tactics. But here's the thing, she can't actually stop you from selling. She can make it hard, but she can't stop it. She's already started with the violations. Document everything, and I mean everything. Save every email, every notice, every interaction. We might need a lawyer before this is done. I can't afford a lengthy legal battle. You might not have a choice, but Robert, I've got your back. That woman has terrorized this neighborhood long enough. After the call, Robert went to water his garden, finding solace in the routine. The tomatoes were coming in beautifully red and firm. The squash were spreading their broad leaves. The herbs filled the air with fragrance, basil, oregano, thyme sage. Lisa's medicine garden, she'd called it. That's when he noticed the damage. Someone had been in his garden during the night. Several tomato plants had been cut at the base, their fruit scattered and smashed. Footprints led from the damaged area back toward the street, toward where the van had been parked. Robert knelt beside the destroyed plants, his hands shaking with rage. These weren't just vegetables. These were Lisa's varieties, heirlooms she'd saved seeds from year after year. The Cherokee purple tomatoes she'd gotten from a patient's grandmother. The San Marzanos she'd started from seeds, brought back from their anniversary trip to Italy. He looked up to find Karen standing at the edge of his property, coffee mug in hand, silk robe fluttering in the morning breeze. "Oh my," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. What a shame. Probably deer, or maybe vandals. The neighborhood's not as safe as it used to be. Perhaps it's for the best that you're leaving. This was deliberate. That's a serious accusation. Do you have proof? Robert pointed to the footprints. Those aren't deer tracks. Karen sipped her coffee. Could be anyone's. Lots of people walk through the neighborhood. Without security cameras, you'll never know who did it. I have security cameras. For just a moment, Karen's mask slipped. Do you? How thorough of you. Though I should mention, recording people without their consent might violate privacy laws. The HOA takes privacy very seriously. Recording my own property is perfectly legal. Is it, I suppose we'll see? She turned to go, then paused. Oh, Robert, the potential buyer who was scheduled to view your house tomorrow, they called to cancel. Something about concerns regarding the neighborhood. Such a shame. She walked away, leaving Robert standing among his destroyed plants. The security footage was clear. 3:00 a.m. a figure in dark clothing entering his garden. The face was obscured by a hood, but the build matched the glimpse he'd gotten of the van driver. The figure spent 10 minutes deliberately destroying selected plants, not random vandalism, but targeted destruction of the rarest varieties. Robert saved the footage to multiple devices, then called Nathan. Dad, that's criminal vandalism. You need to file a police report. With whose police? Karen's brother-in-law works for the department. Different jurisdiction then, state police. And say what the HOA president hired someone to kill my tomatoes, they'll laugh me out of the station. Nathan was quiet for a moment. I'm coming down tomorrow. Nathan. No arguments. I'll take a sick day. This has gone too far. After they hung up, Robert sat on his porch looking at the garden Lisa had loved. He could almost hear her voice. Patience, Bobby. Good things grow slowly, but they grow strong. But patience was hard when someone was destroying everything you'd built. That afternoon, the white van returned parking in a different spot, but still watching. Robert ignored it, focusing on salvaging what he could from the damaged plants. Some might survive if he staked them properly, nursed them back. As he worked, neighbors began stopping by. Mrs. Chen brought him green tea and sympathy. The Patels offered to help replant. Even Mr. Anderson grumbled about HOA overreach and slipped Robert a 20 for new tomatoes. But others kept their distance, walking quickly past, avoiding eye contact. The message was clear: association with Robert Thompson was dangerous. Maria texted him, "She's called an emergency HOA meeting for tonight. Be ready." The Willowbrook Community Center was packed by 7 p.m. Robert sat in the back, feeling the weight of eyes on him. Some sympathetic, most carefully neutral, a few openly hostile. Karen's allies, the ones who benefited from her reign through favorable violations, overlooked and special permissions granted. Karen stood at the podium like a general addressing troops. She wore a navy suit that probably cost more than Robert made in a month, her hair and makeup perfect despite the day's heat. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," she began, her voice carrying easily through the room. "I've called this meeting to address some concerning developments in our community." She clicked a remote, and a PowerPoint appeared on the screen behind her, Robert's house photographed from multiple angles. As you know, maintaining property values is our primary mission. Recently, we've had situations that threaten those values. Click. A photo of Robert's garden, somehow made to look unkempt and chaotic through selective angles. While we've been tolerant of certain agricultural experiments, it's becoming clear that some residents are taking advantage of our patience. "That's a lie," someone called out. Robert turned to see Tom Bradley, a neighbor from 3 streets over. "Thompson's garden is the best-looking yard in the neighborhood." "Thank you for your opinion, Tom," Karen said smoothly. "However, I've received numerous complaints about smells, pests, and unsightly views." "From who?" Maria stood up, her voice strong. "I want to see these complaints." "Complaints are confidential to protect residents from retaliation." "Or they don't exist," Maria shot back. The room erupted in murmurs. Karen's smile tightened. "Furthermore," she continued, raising her voice, "we have evidence of commercial activity being conducted from residential property." Another click. Photos of people picking up vegetables from Robert's free produce stand. This is clearly a business operation violating zoning laws. Those vegetables are free. Mrs. Chen stood up, all 5 feet of her trembling with indignation. Mr. Thompson gives them away. My grandson. Free or not, it's attracting traffic strangers to our neighborhood. It's a security risk. Robert finally stood. The room went quiet. Karen, just say what you really mean. You don't want me to sell my house and leave. Why? Their eyes met across the room. For a moment, the mask dropped completely, and Robert saw the real Karen, small, bitter, consumed by a need for control that would never be satisfied. I don't know what you're implying, Mr. Thompson. I simply want what's best for Willowbrook. What you want is power, Robert said quietly, but his voice carried. You've had it for 8 years, and anyone who challenges it becomes your enemy. I challenged you over the garden ban, and now you're trying to destroy me. How dare you? I dare because it's true, and everyone here knows it. The meeting descended into chaos. Neighbors shouting over each other, old grievances surfacing. Karen tried to regain control, but the dam had broken. 8 years of fear and resentment came pouring out. Finally, Karen slammed her gavel hard enough to crack it. Meeting adjourned, she shouted, then pointed at Robert. This isn't over. As people filed out, many stopped to pat Robert's shoulder or whisper support, but he noticed others, Karen's core supporters, glaring at him with open hostility. In the parking lot, he found Mike Stevens leaning against his truck. Up close, the man was bigger than expected, with the kind of muscles that came from prison yards rather than gyms. His eyes were flat, dead like a shark's. You should be more careful, Mike said conversationally. Accidents happen, especially to troublemakers. Is that a threat? Just friendly advice. This is a nice, quiet neighborhood. Be a shame if something disturbed that peace. Robert took out his phone, obviously recording. Say that again, for the record. Mike smiled, showing yellowed teeth. Have a nice night, Mr. Thompson. Drive safe. Would hate for something to happen to that truck of yours. He walked away, whistling. Robert drove home, carefully checking his mirrors, half expecting to find his brake lines cut. But the truck performed normally, and he made it home safely. Nathan's car was in the driveway when he arrived. Thought you weren't coming until tomorrow. Nathan hugged him, and Robert noticed the gun on his hip. Off-duty, but armed. Changed my mind after your call. Dad, this is serious. That man who threatened you, Mike Stevens, has a record. Assault stalking violation of restraining orders. He's dangerous. How did you... I ran his plates from the photo you sent. Dad, Karen's escalating. This isn't going to end well unless we get ahead of it. They went inside, and Nathan spread files across the kitchen table. He'd been busy. Karen Whitmore has 17 complaints filed against her over 8 years, all dismissed or withdrawn. Her brother-in-law, Detective Ray Morrison, works in records. Convenient, right? So she's untouchable. Not untouchable, just protected. But protection only goes so far. Nathan pulled out another file. Maria Rodriguez isn't the only one documenting Karen's activities. I found 4 other residents willing to talk off the record for now. She's embezzled at least $50,000 from the HOA over 5 years. Christ. It gets worse. Those houses that sold under market value. Her brother bought 3 of them through shell companies. It's a whole operation. She drives down values, forces sales, and her family profits. Robert stared at the evidence his son had compiled in just a few hours. We have to stop her. We will. But Dad, she's going to get desperate. And desperate people do dangerous things. That night they sat on the porch watching the neighborhood sleep. The white van was gone, but Robert knew it would be back. Karen didn't give up. She doubled down. Your mom would have hated all this drama, Robert said. No. Nathan disagreed. Mom would have been right there fighting. She just would have done it with cookies and kindness until the very end. They laughed, remembering Lisa's ability to destroy someone with aggressive sweetness. I miss her, Robert admitted. Me too. They sat in comfortable silence, 2 men united by loss and love, preparing for a war they never wanted. Inside her house, Karen stood at her window watching the Thompson men on their porch. Her husband had long since retreated to his study, wanting no part of whatever she was planning. She picked up her phone, scrolling through her contacts until she found the one she wanted. Someone who owed her everything, someone who would do anything she asked. It's me, she said when they answered. I need you to do something big. The morning after Nathan's arrival, Karen Whitmore stood in her kitchen staring at the police cruiser in Robert Thompson's driveway. She'd run the plates through her connections. Nathan Thompson decorated Officer 3 commendations for community service, spotless record. This complicated things. Her phone rang. Mike Stevens, his voice rough from cigarettes and last night's whiskey. The cop's still there. I can see that, Mike. Want me to back off? Karen gripped the phone tighter. No, double down, but be smart about it. We need leverage, not assault charges. She hung up and opened her laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. Every HOA had emergency powers buried deep in bylaws that nobody ever read. She'd written most of them herself, planning for situations exactly like this. Section 47.3 B. In circumstances where property transactions may adversely affect community welfare, the board may impose temporary restrictions pending review, vague enough to mean anything. Perfect. Across the street, Nathan helped his father repair the damaged garden while Robert explained the escalating harassment. She actually cited me for grass height variation. She's building a paper trail, Nathan said, staking up a damaged tomato plant. Death by 1,000 cuts. Make life so miserable, you'll sell cheap just to escape. Over my dead body. Don't say that. Nathan's voice was sharp. People like Karen when they get desperate enough. He didn't finish, but they both understood. Desperate people did desperate things. The doorbell rang. Janet Morrison, the realtor, stood on the porch with a folder and a grim expression. We have a problem, she said without preamble. 3 buyers have already backed out. They're all saying the same thing, concerns about HOA stability and potential special assessments. Karen's spreading rumors. Worse. She's sending formal letters on HOA letterhead warning about possible litigation regarding your property, scaring them with legal threats she can't actually enforce, but buyers don't know that. Robert felt his hope deflating. So no one will buy. Someone will. But it might take longer, and you might have to accept less than asking price. I can't afford to wait. The hospital contract has deadlines. Janet's expression softened. Robert, I've been selling houses for 38 years. I've dealt with every type of obstacle you can imagine. Karen Whitmore is not going to win this. After she left, Nathan pulled his father aside. I need to make some calls. Don't go anywhere alone, okay? And if Mike Stevens approaches you, record everything. Nathan spent the next 2 hours on the phone, his voice carrying through the kitchen window. Cop language professional, but with an undertone that meant business. When he came back outside, his expression was thoughtful. Dad, has Karen ever mentioned someone named Harold Morrison? No, why? Just following a hunch. Her brother-in-law in the police department. His cousin is a judge who's been under federal investigation for real estate fraud. The connections might be coincidental, but you don't believe in coincidences. Not when they involve this much money. That afternoon, Maria Rodriguez arrived with a box of pastries and a flash drive. Everything I've documented, she said, handing it to Nathan. 2 years of evidence. Financial records I probably shouldn't have, but my nephew works at the bank. Karen's been moving money through accounts that don't match any legitimate HOA business. Nathan plugged the drive into his laptop, whistling low as he scrolled through the files. This is RICO-level corruption. What's RICO? Robert asked. Racketeering, organized crime statutes. If we can prove a pattern of criminal activity. Nathan trailed off, studying the screen. Maria, would you testify to this? If it means stopping her, yes, but I need protection. My family. I understand. Let me make some more calls. As Nathan worked, Robert walked his property, trying to memorize every plant, every tree, every inch of soil he'd worked with Lisa. The basil plant by the door was thriving despite everything its leaves fragrant in the afternoon sun. A text from an unknown number, you should have just left quietly. Then another, your son can't protect you forever. And another, accidents happen, even to cops. Which Robert showed Nathan, who immediately forwarded them to someone named Detective Sarah Chen at the state police. They're escalating, Nathan said quietly. This is good. How is threatening us good? Because scared people make mistakes, and mistakes leave evidence. That evening, Karen called another emergency HOA meeting. This time she'd stacked the audience with supporters, people who owed her favors or feared her wrath. Robert recognized the pattern: divide and conquer, isolate the target. She stood at the podium radiating righteous indignation. It has come to my attention that certain residents are actively working to undermine our community's stability. Her gaze fixed on Robert. Spreading lies, making false accusations, attempting to damage the reputation we've spent years building. What lies? Maria stood up. Everything we've said is documented. Forged documents, fake evidence. I've consulted with our legal team, and what you're doing constitutes libel, slander, defamation. The room erupted, Karen's supporters shouting agreement, others protesting. Through it all, Karen stood serene, a conductor orchestrating chaos. Then Nathan stood up, and his presence, tall, authoritative, wearing his badge on his belt, commanded attention. Mrs. Whitmore, are you aware that making false accusations about criminal activity is itself a crime? Karen's smile didn't waver. I'm not sure what you mean, Officer Thompson, though I should mention you're outside your jurisdiction here. Crime is crime, jurisdiction or not, and threatening witnesses is a federal offense. Is someone threatening witnesses? How terrible. You should definitely investigate that. The challenge in her voice was clear. Prove it. Nathan pulled out his phone. Actually, I am investigating, in cooperation with state and federal authorities. He let that sink in. So I'd advise everyone here to think very carefully about their actions going forward. The meeting dissolved into chaos. Karen tried to maintain control, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Federal authorities' state investigation. Her supporters began edging toward the exits. In the parking lot afterward, Mike Stevens was waiting by Nathan's car. Not threatening, just standing there smoking, making his presence known. Officer Thompson, heard you're a hero cop. Commendations and everything. Nathan said nothing, just waited. Heroes have a weakness, though. They always try to save everyone. Mike flicked his cigarette away. Can't save everyone. Sometimes people get hurt no matter what heroes do. Is that a threat, Mr. Stevens? Just philosophy. Have a nice night. After Mike drove away, Nathan checked his car carefully. Tires, brake lines, everything. Nothing tampered with, but the message was clear. They were being watched, studied, evaluated for weaknesses. Back at the house, they found a new surprise. Every violation notice Robert had received had been rescinded, replaced with new ones. Same violations, but now with doubled fines and accelerated deadlines. She's rewriting history, Nathan said, examining the notices, making it look like you've been ignoring violations for weeks instead of days. Can she do that? Legally, no. But she's betting you won't have the resources to fight it. Robert's phone rang. Janet Morrison, excited. Robert, I have a buyer. Cash offer above asking price. They want to close in 2 weeks. That's incredible. Who? Investment group from the city. They love the garden setup, want to keep it as is. There's just one catch. Robert's heart sank. What catch? They need HOA approval for the intended use. They want to maintain it as an urban farm, maybe add some educational programs. Karen has to sign off on it. She'll never approve that. Maybe not, but if she refuses without valid reason, that's actionable discrimination. I've already had my lawyer draft a notice. After Janet hung up, Robert felt a spark of hope. Maybe there was a way through this after all. That hope lasted exactly until 3 a.m. when the sound of breaking glass woke them. Nathan was out of bed instantly, gun in hand. Stay here, he whispered, but Robert followed anyway. The living room window was shattered. A brick lay among the glass shards, a note rubber-banded to it, last warning. Nathan was already on the phone with dispatch while Robert surveyed the damage. Not just the window someone had poisoned his garden. The smell of herbicide was overwhelming. Every plant within 20 feet of the house was already wilting. Don't touch anything, Nathan warned. This is a crime scene now. The local police arrived within minutes, followed by state police Nathan had called. Detective Sarah Chen, a compact woman with sharp eyes, took in the scene with professional calm. Mr. Thompson, I understand you've been having issues with your HOA president. Robert laughed bitterly. That's one way to put it. We've been monitoring the situation. This escalation changes things. We're opening an official investigation. Karen arrived as the sun came up, still in her silk pajamas and robe, playing the concerned neighbor perfectly. "Oh my goodness, Robert. What happened? This is terrible." "Cut the act, Karen," Nathan said coldly. "We know you're behind this. How dare you accuse me? I'm the HOA president. I work to prevent things like this." She turned to Detective Chen. "Officer, this man has been making wild accusations against me for days. He's clearly unstable." Chen's expression didn't change. "Ma'am, we'll be investigating all possibilities. I'll need to ask you some questions." "Of course. Anything to help. Though I should mention my brother-in-law is Detective Ray Morrison. Perhaps you know him?" It was a power play reminding everyone of her connections, but Chen just smiled. "I know of him. In fact, Internal Affairs knows him quite well. Now about your whereabouts last night." Karen's facade cracked slightly. "I was home, asleep, with my husband." "And Mr. Stevens, your, associate, where was he?" "I have no idea. Mike is a resident, not my employee." "Interesting, because we have employment records showing you've been paying him as a security consultant." Karen went pale. "I want my lawyer." "That's your right. Oh, and Mrs. Whitmore. You might want to advise Mr. Stevens to turn himself in. We have a warrant for his arrest, previous restraining order violations." Karen fled back to her house. Within an hour, 3 moving trucks appeared at the Stevens residence. Mike was running, but the damage to Robert's garden was complete. Thousands of dollars of vegetables destroyed, years of work poisoned. He stood among the dead plants trying not to cry when Mrs. Chen approached. "Mr. Thompson, my grandmother immigrated here from China 50 years ago. Started a garden just like this. Fed the whole neighborhood during hard times. Someone burned it down because they didn't like Chinese people growing food in their town." "What did she do?" "She replanted every single seed, and the neighbors helped." Chen smiled. "Your neighbors want to help too. They're just scared. Give them a reason not to be." That afternoon, something beautiful happened. Tom Bradley showed up with a shovel and seeds. Then the Patels with compost. Mrs. Chen with new tomato plants. One by one, neighbors who'd been too frightened to stand up to Karen began arriving, tools in hand. "She's gone too far," Mr. Anderson said, helping clear poisoned soil. "This isn't about HOA rules anymore. This is about basic human decency." Even some of Karen's former supporters showed up, shamefaced but determined to help. The garden that had taken years to build was being rebuilt in hours by a community finally finding its courage. Karen watched from her window, making call after call, trying to rally her remaining allies. But the tide had turned. Her power had always been based on fear, and once that fear broke, she had nothing. That evening, as dozens of neighbors worked together in Robert's garden, Maria set up speakers and played music. Someone brought food. Children ran between the newly planted rows. It became an impromptu block party, a celebration of community over tyranny. Nathan pulled his father aside. "Chen says they're close to having enough for federal charges. The moving trucks at Stevens' place were suspicious. He's definitely running from something bigger than restraining order violations." "What about Karen?" "She's trapped. Can't run without looking guilty, can't stay without facing charges. She's going to get desperate." "More desperate than poisoning my garden." Nathan's expression was grim. "Dad, desperate people do things you can't imagine. We need to be ready for anything." As if on cue, Robert's phone buzzed, another unknown number. "You think you've won? This isn't over. Blood is thicker than water, and family protects family. You have no idea what's coming." Nathan immediately called Chen, but the number was untraceable. A burner phone purchased with cash, used once and discarded. "She's calling in favors," Nathan said. "Big ones." That night they barely slept. Every sound could be another attack. Every car passing could be Mike Stevens returning. The community's show of support had been beautiful, but Karen Whitmore didn't accept defeat. She doubled down always. At dawn, Robert found a manila envelope on his doorstep. No postmark, hand-delivered in the night. Inside were photographs Nathan at various crime scenes from his police work taken with a telephoto lens. Robert at Lisa's grave, Maria's children walking to school. The message was clear. "We know where you are. We know everyone you care about. But there was something else in the envelope that made Nathan's blood run cold. A court document filed just hours ago. "She's filed an emergency injunction," Nathan read, his voice tight with anger, "claiming you're creating a public health hazard with your garden. She's got a judge to issue a cease and desist order. You have to stop all agricultural activities immediately or face arrest." What judge would sign this? Nathan showed him the signature. Judge Harold Morrison, Karen's brother-in-law's cousin, the one supposedly under federal investigation. "He's protecting her," Robert said, understanding dawning. "They're all in this together. Or he's trying to save himself by helping her one last time." Nathan pulled out his phone. "This ends now. I'm calling in every favor I have." As Nathan made calls, Robert stood in his newly replanted garden, watching the sunrise paint the sky pink and gold. Lisa had loved mornings like this, had called them God's promise that beauty could follow darkness. "I'm trying, baby," he whispered to the morning air, "but they're making it so hard." The basil plant rustled in a breeze that touched nothing else, and for just a moment Robert could swear he smelled Lisa's perfume, felt her hand on his shoulder. "Fight smart, not hard." Her voice seemed to whisper. "Let them defeat themselves." The cease and desist order lay on Robert Thompson's kitchen table like a poisonous snake. Judge Harold Morrison's signature sprawled across the bottom, making it official. No more gardening, no more vegetable growing, effective immediately. Nathan hung up his phone, his expression grim but determined. "Detective Chen is driving down from the state police headquarters. She says Morrison signing this order is exactly what they needed: judicial overreach, clear conflict of interest. He just gave them probable cause to expand the investigation. But in the meantime, I can't touch my garden." "Not legally, but Dad, this is bigger than vegetables now. Karen just exposed an entire network of corruption." The doorbell rang. Maria Rodriguez stood there with Sergeant Rodriguez, her husband still in uniform from his night shift. "We need to talk," Rodriguez said, glancing around nervously. "Inside." They gathered in the living room where Rodriguez pulled out a thick folder. "I've been building this case for 2 years, he began. "Off the books because I didn't know who to trust. Morrison has connections throughout the department. But last night after the attack on your garden, I decided enough was enough." He spread documents across the coffee table: bank records, property deeds, phone records. "Karen Whitmore is just the tip of the iceberg. Her brother David Whitmore has purchased 17 properties in this county over 5 years, all through different shell companies. Every single one was bought after the previous owners were driven out by HOA harassment code violations or legal pressure." 17. Robert couldn't hide his shock. "That we know of. The money trail leads back to Judge Morrison. He's been using his position to fix cases, approve questionable foreclosures, and ensure the properties end up in the right hands." Maria leaned forward. "How much money are we talking about?" "Conservative estimate, $3 million in profit. But here's the thing." Rodriguez pointed to a bank statement. 2 weeks ago, large withdrawals from all their accounts. They're moving money offshore. They know something's coming." Nathan studied the documents. "This is FBI territory. Major public corruption." "Already made the call," Rodriguez said. "They'll be here this afternoon. But Robert, I need to warn you, Karen knows the walls are closing in. A cornered animal is dangerous." As if summoned by the mention of her name, Karen Whitmore appeared at Robert's front door, knocking with the authority of someone who'd never been denied entry. Robert opened the door but didn't invite her in. "We need to talk," she said, her usual polish cracking around the edges. Dark circles ringed her eyes. Her perfect hair showed gray roots. "I don't think that's wise, Karen. My lawyer—" "Forget lawyers." She glanced around nervously. "I'm offering you a deal. A good deal." "I'm listening." "Withdraw your complaints. Stop cooperating with the investigation. In return, I'll approve your sale, waive all fines, and personally ensure you can move without any further interference." "And if I refuse," her mask slipped completely, revealing something feral underneath, "then things get worse, much worse. You think a brick through your window is bad? You have no idea what Mike is capable of, what I'm capable of." Nathan appeared beside his father. Mrs. Whitmore, you just threatened a witness in an active investigation, in front of a police officer. Karen laughed high and slightly hysterical. Prove it. It's your word against mine, and my word carries weight in this town. Not anymore, Rodriguez said, stepping into view. He held up his phone. Everything's recorded. You just added witness intimidation to your charges. Karen stumbled backward, her carefully constructed world crumbling. You can't. This isn't I have rights. Yes, you do, Rodriguez said calmly. You have the right to remain silent. But Karen was already running surprisingly fast in her designer heels, fleeing to her house. Rodriguez didn't pursue. Let her run, he said. She's not going anywhere. FBI will be watching all airports' train stations. She's trapped. Inside her house, Karen made frantic phone calls. Her lawyer wasn't answering. Her brother David had disconnected his phone. Even Mike Stevens was unreachable. She stood at her window watching Robert's house and made a decision. If she was going down, she was taking everyone with her. She pulled out a burner phone she'd kept for emergencies and dialed a number she'd memorized. It's me. Yes, I know you said never to call, but I need that favor. The big one. The voice on the other end was cold professional. This will clear your debt. All of it. Fine. Just do it. 2 hours later, Detective Chen arrived with a full FBI task force. Black SUVs lined the street. Agents in bulletproof vests began executing search warrants simultaneously at Karen's house, Judge Morrison's home, and David Whitmore's properties. Karen didn't resist when they came for her. She walked out with her head high, playing the martyred queen to the end. But as they put her in handcuffs, she looked directly at Robert and mouthed, "It's not over." The search of her house revealed everything: financial records, recorded conversations of her threatening residents, even a journal documenting her plans to force out undesirable neighbors. But it was Mike Stevens' abandoned apartment that provided the most disturbing evidence. Photos of Robert's family going back months, detailed surveillance notes, and something that made Nathan's blood run cold: building plans for Robert's house with structural weak points circled in red. He was planning something, Chen said grimly. Something bad. That evening, as FBI agents processed evidence and neighbors gathered to watch the drama unfold, Robert felt a mix of relief and exhaustion. It was over. Finally, over. Or so he thought. The fire started at 2 a.m. Robert woke to Nathan shaking him, smoke already filling the room. Dad, we need to go now. The house was ablaze, flames consuming everything with horrifying speed. They stumbled out coughing, gasping, to find the garden shed engulfed the flames spreading toward the neighbors' houses. Fire trucks arrived within minutes, but the damage was done. The house was salvageable, but barely. The garden shed with all of Robert's tools, seeds, Lisa's gardening journals gone. Accelerant, the fire chief said later. This was arson. Professional job. Robert sat on the curb watching firefighters douse the last embers when Chen approached. We caught him, she said simply. Mike Stevens at the state border. Still had accelerant on his clothes. Did Karen, he's talking, says she promised him $50,000 to burn you out. The call came from a burner phone, but we traced the purchase. Video footage of her buying it. The relief Robert felt was overwhelming. It was really over this time. But the cost had been high. His home damaged his garden. Partially destroyed, his peace of mind shattered. He looked at the basil plant somehow. Miraculously, it had survived, protected by its position near the door where firefighters had concentrated their initial efforts. Nathan sat beside him. We'll rebuild Dad, better than before. I don't know if I have the strength. You do. Mom gave it to you. And the whole neighborhood's going to help. As dawn broke, neighbors began arriving, not with casseroles or condolences, but with tools, lumber plants. Tom Bradley brought a construction crew. He owned a contracting business. The Patels brought their landscaper cousins. Mrs. Chen organized food for the workers. Even people from other neighborhoods came, people who'd heard about the widow standing up to HOA tyranny. By noon, Robert's property looked like a construction site, but a hopeful one. Maria Rodriguez had started a GoFundMe that had already raised $30,000. For the man who fed our community and fought for our freedom, the description read. Janet Morrison, the realtor, brought incredible news. The buyers still want the property. In fact, they're offering more. They love the community support angle. They want to make this a model urban farm, a symbol of neighborhoods taking back power from corrupted HOA. 3 weeks later, at Karen Whitmore's arraignment, the full scope of the conspiracy was revealed. 17 counts of embezzlement, 23 counts of criminal harassment, conspiracy to commit arson, racketeering, and more. Judge Morrison faced even more serious charges: judicial corruption, bribery, conspiracy to violate civil rights. The FBI revealed he'd fixed over 40 cases, always benefiting the same network of people. David Whitmore had fled to Costa Rica, but was arrested at the airport and extradited. Mike Stevens, facing life in prison for the arson and previous convictions, had turned state's evidence revealing every detail of Karen's operations. She'd built a criminal empire on the foundation of suburban respectability, using HOA rules as weapons, and her neighbors' desire for peace as leverage. The judge at her arraignment, brought in from another district to avoid conflicts, set bail at $2 million. Karen couldn't make it. For the first time in 8 years, she was powerless. Robert attended every day of the trial, not from vindictiveness, but from a need to see justice done, to watch the system that had protected her finally hold her accountable. The testimony was damning, family after family describing harassment threats, financial ruin. Maria's evidence proved systematic embezzlement. Rodriguez's investigation showed the broader conspiracy. But the most powerful moment came when Robert took the stand. "She didn't just try to destroy my home," he said, looking directly at Karen. "She tried to destroy my wife's legacy. Lisa spent her last days planting gardens that would feed people, heal people. Karen tried to poison that dream literally and figuratively, but she failed." He pulled out a photo of the rebuilt garden thriving despite everything. This is what community looks like. This is what happens when neighbors stand together against tyranny. Karen Whitmore thought fear made her powerful. She was wrong. Love is more powerful. Community is more powerful. And vegetables. He smiled slightly. Vegetables grown with love are the most powerful of all. The courtroom erupted in applause before the judge could call for order. Karen was convicted on all counts. The sentencing would come later, but she faced a minimum of 15 years. As she was led away, she passed Robert. For a moment, their eyes met. She looked smaller, somehow diminished the queen without her kingdom. "I hope you're happy," she whispered. "No," Robert replied, "but I'm free. We all are." 6 months later, Robert stood in his new farm watching the grand opening celebration. The hospital contract had been expanded. He'd hired 5 employees, all former victims of HOA harassment from various neighborhoods. Nathan was there with his new girlfriend, a prosecutor he'd met during the trial. Maria had her bakery stand selling goods made with Robert's vegetables. Even grumpy Mr. Anderson was there, grudgingly admitting the tomatoes were acceptable. A news crew was doing a feature on the farm that had risen from the ashes of HOA corruption. The reporter asked Robert what he'd learned from the experience. "That bullies only have the power we give them," he said, handling a perfect tomato. "That communities are stronger than any individual tyrant, and that sometimes the best revenge is simply living well and growing good food." Any regrets? Robert thought of the months of harassment, the destroyed property, the fear and anger. Then he looked at the thriving farm, the supportive community, the legacy he'd built from Lisa's dream. "Just one," he said finally. "I wish my wife could see this. She would have loved knowing that her garden didn't just survive, it multiplied." The camera panned over the farm rows of vegetables, fruit trees, herb gardens. Children from the neighborhood ran between the rows, learning about sustainable agriculture. Former enemies worked side by side, united by shared purpose. But the interviewer had one more question. "We heard Karen Whitmore is appealing her conviction. Are you worried?" Robert's expression darkened slightly. "Karen doesn't give up easily, but neither do I." 2 days later, a letter arrived at the farm. No return address, postmarked from the federal detention center where Karen was being held pending sentencing. Robert opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 5 words, "This isn't over. Watch yourself." Nathan wanted him to report it immediately, but Robert just filed it away. Karen was locked up. Her network dismantled, her power broken. What could she possibly do from prison? He would learn the answer soon enough. 3 weeks before Karen's sentencing hearing, strange things began happening at the farm. Equipment moved overnight, irrigation lines cut. Dead animals left at the gate a clear threat. "She's got someone on the outside," Nathan said, reviewing security footage that showed nothing but shadows. "Someone professional." Then Maria's bakery was vandalized, snitch spray-painted across her windows. Tom Bradley's construction site suffered a suspicious fire. Every person who'd testified against Karen began experiencing harassment. Chen investigated but found nothing concrete. Whoever's doing this knows how to avoid leaving evidence. The attacks escalated. Robert's delivery truck's tires were slashed. The hospital threatened to cancel the contract if deliveries weren't reliable. Someone was systematically trying to destroy everything they'd rebuilt. Then came the phone call that changed everything. "Mr. Thompson." The voice was elderly refined. "My name is Margaret Whitmore. Karen is my daughter." Robert gripped the phone tighter. "What do you want?" "To meet, to explain, and perhaps to help." Against Nathan's objections, Robert agreed to meet Margaret at a public restaurant. She was 73, elegant in an understated way, with eyes that held both sadness and steel. "I failed my daughter," she began without preamble. "Gave her everything except boundaries. Taught her that winning was everything, that power was the only real currency." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because she's my daughter, and I love her, but she's become a monster, and monsters need to be stopped." Margaret pulled out an envelope. "She's been running things from prison through coded letters to someone she calls the gardener. I intercepted this." Robert read the letter, his blood chilling. It contained detailed instructions for destroying his farm, ruining his allies, and ultimately something worse, much worse. "She wants you dead," Margaret said bluntly. "If she can't have power, she wants revenge, and she's willing to pay everything she has left for it." "Who's the gardener?" "I don't know, but I know she met with someone the day before her arrest, someone she'd been holding in reserve. Her nuclear option, she called it." Robert shared the information with Chen, who immediately put protection details on everyone who testified. But they still didn't know who the gardener was or when they would strike. The answer came at Karen's sentencing hearing. The courtroom was packed. Karen entered in orange shackled, but still carrying herself like royalty. As the judge read the sentence, 25 years, no possibility of parole for 15, Karen's composure never cracked. But as she was being led away, she looked directly at Robert and smiled. Then she spoke loud enough for everyone to hear, "The garden will bloom when the gardener decides. And Robert, he's already among you." Chen immediately understood. "The gardener isn't coming. He's already here, someone in the community." The investigation that followed was intense. Everyone was scrutinized alibis, checked backgrounds, investigated. But it was Nathan who made the connection. "Dad, remember the first day Karen confronted you? You said she mentioned knowing people, important people who owed her favors." "Yeah." "What if the gardener isn't someone she hired, but someone who owes her? Someone whose life she saved or made possible?" The piece fell into place when they discovered that 5 years ago, Karen had paid for a young man's legal defense when he was falsely accused of theft. She'd gotten him acquitted, paid for his education, set him up in business. That man was James Chen, Mrs. Chen's son, now a successful landscaper. The same landscaper who'd helped rebuild Robert's garden, who had access to the farm, who knew everyone's schedules. When they arrested him, he broke down crying. "She saved my life. She said I owed her. Said if I didn't help, she'd reveal things about my family that would destroy us. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I just wanted her to leave us alone." James Chen's arrest sent shockwaves through the community. The soft-spoken landscaper who'd helped rebuild gardens throughout Willowbrook had been Karen's secret weapon all along, a sleeper agent activated by desperation and old debts. Robert stood in his farm's greenhouse processing the betrayal when Mrs. Chen arrived. The elderly woman's face was etched with shame and grief. "I had no idea," she whispered, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "My own son. How could I not know?" "It's not your fault," Robert said gently. "Karen manipulated him just like she manipulated everyone. But he was in your home. He helped rebuild after the fire, all while planning to destroy you." She pulled out an envelope with shaking hands. "He left this. Asked me to give it to you." Robert read James's confession, written in neat handwriting that trembled with emotion. "Mr. Thompson, I'm sorry. 5 years ago, I was accused of stealing from a client. I was innocent, but I was also young Asian and poor. No one believed me except Karen. She paid for a real lawyer, proved my innocence, saved me from prison. She said I'd owe her someday. I thought it would be something small. Then she called in the debt. She knew things about my father's immigration status that weren't quite legal, threatened to destroy my whole family. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just understanding. The things I did were small moving equipment, cutting lines, leaving dead animals. I never would have hurt anyone physically. I'm not that person, but I'm also not the person I thought I was. Maybe that's worse. Detective Chen arrived to collect the letter as evidence. He's cooperating fully. With his testimony, Karen's sentence will likely be extended. Conspiracy from prison witness, intimidation, attempted destruction of property. What will happen to him? Depends on the prosecutor, but given the coercion element, probably probation and community service. That afternoon, Nathan helped his father walk through the farm, checking for any other sabotage James might have left behind. They found several irrigation timers reprogrammed to flood the fields, which would have destroyed the young plants. She really thought of everything, Nathan said, fixing the timers. Even from prison, she was playing chess while everyone else played checkers. No, Robert corrected. She was playing war. Chess has rules. The final sentencing hearing for Karen Whitmore took place on a gray Thursday that threatened rain. The courthouse was packed residents from multiple neighborhoods, all victims of various HOA tyrants who'd been inspired by Robert's stand. Karen entered in shackles, orange jumpsuit hanging loose on her frame. Prison had not been kind to her. The perfect hair was gray and stringy, the manicured nails broken, the imperious posture diminished, but her eyes still burned with that familiar rage. The judge, brought in from another state to ensure impartiality, reviewed the additional charges stemming from James Chen's testimony. Mrs. Whitmore, you orchestrated a campaign of terror from your prison cell. You corrupted a young man using blackmail and coercion. You attempted to destroy the livelihoods of citizens who had done nothing but stand up to your tyranny. Karen stood straighter. Your Honor, I'd like to make a statement. The judge nodded. Karen turned to face the gallery, her gaze finding Robert immediately. You think you've won, she said, her voice still carrying that old authority. You think you've defeated me. But I built an empire in Willowbrook. For 8 years I maintained order, kept property values high, prevented the neighborhood from descending into chaos. You ruled through fear, someone called out. Karen smiled coldly. Fear works. Fear keeps people in line. Fear maintains standards. Without me, Willowbrook will deteriorate. Property values will plummet. The neighborhood will become just another suburban wasteland. Your Honor. Robert stood up. May I respond? The judge considered, then nodded. Robert walked forward, standing where he could see both Karen and the gallery. Karen, you're right about one thing. You built an empire, but empires built on fear always fall. In the 6 months since your arrest, property values in Willowbrook have increased 12%. Crime is down. Neighbor complaints have dropped to nearly zero. You know why? Karen said nothing, but her jaw tightened. Because fear might maintain order, but community creates harmony. Your HOA collected dues and imposed fines. Our new HOA, run by Maria Rodriguez, organizes block parties and community gardens. Your regime punished variations in grass height. Ours celebrates diversity in both lawns and people. He pulled out his phone, showing a photo of the neighborhood. Gardens bloomed in dozens of yards. Children played in streets where they'd once been afraid to walk. Neighbors talked over fences that had once been barriers. This is Willowbrook now. Not perfect, but free. Not uniform, but united. You didn't maintain paradise, Karen. You maintained a prison, and now we're all free. The courtroom erupted in applause. Karen's face contorted with rage, then something worse, defeat. For the first time, she truly understood that her kingdom hadn't just been taken from her. It had been transformed into something she could never have built. The judge's gavel restored order. Karen Whitmore, for your original crimes and these additional conspiracies, I sentence you to 35 years in federal prison. No possibility of parole for 20 years. Additionally, you are ordered to pay full restitution to all victims, totaling $3.2 million. As the number registered, Karen's legs gave out. She had to be supported by the bailiffs. Everything she'd built, stolen, hoarded, gone. She'd die in prison, broke and forgotten. As she was led away, she passed Robert one last time. Their eyes met, and for just a moment he saw not the tyrant, but the frightened small person she'd always been underneath. "I hope you find peace, Karen," he said quietly. She stopped searching his face for mockery. Finding none, her expression crumbled. "I don't know how." She whispered the first honest words she'd spoken in years. Then she was gone, led away to begin a sentence that would likely outlast her life. Outside the courthouse, the crowd celebrated. Maria had brought pastries. The Patels had made samosas. It turned into an impromptu picnic on the courthouse lawn, a community celebrating its freedom. But Robert stood apart, feeling oddly hollow. Justice had been served, but it brought no joy. Just relief and a strange sadness for the woman Karen might have been if she'd chosen differently. Nathan found him sitting on a bench, staring at nothing. "You okay, Dad?" Lisa would have felt sorry for her, Robert said. Even after everything, she would have found compassion for Karen. Mom was a better person than most of us. No, she just understood something I'm only now learning. Hurt people hurt people. Karen was a tyrant, but she was also a victim of her own fear, her own need for control. That doesn't excuse what she did. No, but understanding it helps me let go. Holding on to anger would just be letting her keep power over me, and she's taken enough. 1 year later, Robert stood in the same spot where his original garden had been poisoned, but now it was transformed. The small farm had become a community agricultural center with teaching gardens, a greenhouse classroom, and a memorial garden dedicated to Lisa. The hospital contract had expanded to include 3 more facilities. Robert employed 12 people full-time, all formerly unemployed or underemployed residents who'd been victims of various HOA abuses. Maria's bakery had a permanent stand on the property, selling goods made with ingredients grown on site. Her business had tripled since escaping Karen's shadow. Tom Bradley had donated his construction expertise to build a community center where gardening classes were held. The Patels taught cooking classes using farm produce. Even Mr. Anderson, now the unofficial farm security guard, had his own corner where he grew the sourest lemons in the state and made surprisingly excellent lemonade. The transformation of Willowbrook had become a national story. HOAs across the country were being reformed, their boards restructured to prevent the concentration of power that had allowed Karen's reign of terror. Nathan arrived for the 1-year anniversary celebration, bringing his fiancée Sarah and news. "Dad, I got promoted, detective, and I've been asked to head a new unit investigating HOA corruption and abuse of power." Robert hugged his son, pride overwhelming him. "Your mother would be so proud. Of both of us." As the celebration continued around them, a familiar figure appeared at the farm's gate. Margaret Whitmore, Karen's mother, stood uncertainly, holding a small potted plant. Robert walked over the crowd, growing quiet. "Mrs. Whitmore." "Mr. Thompson, I know I'm probably not welcome, but I wanted to give you this." She held out the plant, a basil seedling. "It's from the same heritage variety your wife grew. I found a specialty seed supplier. I thought maybe it could grow here, something good from all the bad." Robert accepted the plant, seeing the genuine remorse in her eyes. "Everyone's welcome here," he said. "That's what makes us different from what your daughter built." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "She writes to me from prison. She's different, smaller, scared. She asked me to tell you she's sorry. I don't know if she means it, but she asked. Maybe she does. People can change." "Do you really believe that?" Robert looked at his thriving farm, his supportive community, the place where tyranny had given way to freedom. "I have to. Otherwise, what's the point of any of this?" Margaret stayed for the celebration, helping serve food, listening to stories of the neighborhood's transformation. By the end, she was laughing with Mrs. Chen, the 2 mothers bonding over their complicated children. As sunset painted the farm golden, Robert stood by Lisa's memorial garden. The original basil plant, the one she'd planted days before dying, had been transplanted here. It had grown into a massive bush, its fragrance filling the air. "We did it, baby," he whispered. "Not the way we planned, but maybe better. You always said the best gardens grow from the richest compost. Well, we had plenty of manure to work with. A laugh carried on the wind, and for a moment he could swear he felt her presence. The party continued into the evening. Children ran through the gardens with flashlights. Adults shared food and stories. Former enemies had become friends united by shared struggle and common purpose. Then Nathan's phone rang. His expression changed as he listened. "Dad," he said quietly, "there's been an incident at the federal prison. Karen Whitmore. She's dead." The news spread quickly through the gathering. Karen had been found in her cell, apparent suicide. She'd left a note, just 2 words, "I'm sorry." The celebration muted people unsure how to react. The tyrant was dead, but there was no joy in it, just a sad ending to a sad story. Robert called for attention. "Karen Whitmore is dead," he announced. "She died alone in prison, consumed by the very fear and hatred she spread for years. We could celebrate, but what would that make us? Instead, I propose we observe a moment of silence, not for the tyrant she became, but for the person she could have been, for the community member she might have been if she'd chosen love over fear, cooperation over control." The crowd stood silent in the gathering darkness. Some bowed their heads, others looked at the stars beginning to appear. Mrs. Chen wept quietly. Margaret Whitmore stood apart, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. When the moment passed, Robert spoke again. "Let her death be the final ending to that chapter. Tomorrow we continue building something better. Not in spite of her, but because of what we learned from standing against her. We learned that communities are stronger than individuals, that love conquers fear, that gardens grow best when tended by many hands." The gathering slowly reformed, quieter now, but somehow warmer. People hugged, more talked, softer appreciated the freedom they'd fought for. As the last guest left, Nathan helped his father close up the farm. "You handled that well," Nathan said. "The news about Karen. Your mother would have wanted compassion, even for Karen. Especially for Karen. Mom always said the people who deserve love least need it most." They worked in comfortable silence, securing greenhouses, checking irrigation systems. The farm slept peacefully under stars no longer hidden by the smoke of burning gardens. A week later, a package arrived at the farm. No return address, but postmarked from the federal prison. Inside was a letter in Karen's handwriting and a small key. Robert read the letter alone in his office. "Mr. Thompson? If you're reading this, I'm dead. Good. I was never going to survive decades in prison. I'm too proud, too broken, too tired. I've spent months hating you, planning revenge, dreaming of destroying everything you built. But last night I dreamed of your wife's garden, the one I poisoned. In the dream, it grew back stronger, fed by the poison transforming toxin into beauty. I woke understanding what you tried to tell me. I built an empire of fear. You grew a community of love. One thrives, one dies. I chose wrong. The key opens a safety deposit box at First National, box 447. Inside is money I hid from the investigation. Almost $500, 000. It's yours. Not as apology. Nothing can apologize for what I did, but maybe it can help build something good. Tell my mother I'm sorry I became a monster. Tell the neighborhood I'm sorry I made them afraid. Tell your wife, wherever she is, that her garden won. It won before I even started fighting." Karen Whitmore. A tyrant who learned too late. Robert sat with the letter for a long time. Then he called Nathan Chen and his lawyer. The money was recovered, legally processed, and donated to establishing the Lisa Thompson Memorial Fund, providing free vegetables to food banks and funding community gardens in low-income neighborhoods. Karen's funeral was small. Her husband, finally free, didn't attend. Her brother was in prison. But Margaret was there along with Robert Maria, and surprisingly, a dozen residents from Willowbrook. "Why did you come?" Margaret asked them. Mrs. Chen answered for the group. "Because forgiveness is harder than hatred, but more important. She was our neighbor. She was wrong, but she was ours." They buried Karen Whitmore on a rainy Tuesday, her grave marked with a simple stone. Someone no one would ever admit who planted flowers around it. Within months, it became one of the prettiest spots in the cemetery, tended by anonymous hands. 5 years had passed since Karen Whitmore's death, and Willowbrook had become unrecognizable from the fear-ruled subdivision it once was. Robert Thompson stood in what was now the Thompson Community Agricultural Center, watching a group of children learn to plant seeds under Maria's patient instruction. The farm had expanded to encompass 3 lots purchased with the funds from Karen's hidden money and community donations. What started as one man's attempt to honor his wife's memory had become a movement that spread across the state. Nathan arrived with his family, Sarah, and their 2-year-old daughter Lisa, named for the grandmother she'd never meet, but whose legacy surrounded her in growing things. "Dad, did you see the news?" Nathan asked, bouncing Lisa on his hip. 3 more HOAs in California just voted to dissolve their boards and restructure based on the Willowbrook model. The Willowbrook model had become a template for HOA reform: nationwide term limits, transparent finances, community-focused rather than punitive approaches, and most importantly, checks and balances to prevent any individual from accumulating too much power. Robert smiled, but his attention was drawn to a familiar figure at the farm's entrance. Margaret Whitmore, now 78, arrived every Tuesday to volunteer in the children's garden. She'd become something of a grandmother figure to the neighborhood kids, teaching them about plants while quietly atoning for her daughter's sins. "Mrs. Margaret!" the children called out, running to greet her. She'd legally changed her name to Margaret Chen after Mrs. Chen had informally adopted her into their family, giving her the belonging she'd never found in her own broken household. The 2 women had become inseparable, bonding over mahjong and gardening, finding peace in their unlikely friendship. As Robert watched the transformation of his community, his phone rang. Janet Morrison, the realtor, who'd stood by him during the dark days. "Robert, you're going to want to sit down for this." "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, but I just got a call from the state agricultural department. They want to buy the old Whitmore property and turn it into an extension of your agricultural center. Full-price cash offer." Robert did sit down. Karen's former house, the fortress from which she'd ruled through fear, would become part of the community farm. The irony was almost too perfect. "They want to name it the Community Reconciliation Garden," Janet continued, "a place where former enemies can work together, growing food and understanding." That evening, the community gathered for their monthly potluck. These had replaced the old HOA meetings, serving the same organizational function, but with food, laughter, and children playing instead of Robert's rules and violation notices. Maria, now the elected community coordinator, they'd abolished the title of president, stood to make announcements. "First, our free vegetable program has provided over 100,000 pounds of produce to local food banks this year." Applause filled the room. "Second, Tom Bradley's construction company has volunteered to build the new greenhouse classroom, with the Patels providing the architectural design." More applause. And finally, Maria's voice softened. "Today marks exactly 5 years since our community was freed from tyranny. I think we should hear from the man who started it all." Robert tried to wave off the attention, but the community insisted. He stood holding his granddaughter Lisa, looking out at faces that had become family. "I didn't start anything," he said. "I just wanted to move house and grow vegetables. Karen Whitmore started this by trying to stop me, but in her opposition, she created something she never intended: unity." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "You know, I've been thinking about Karen lately, not with anger, but with something like understanding. She was so afraid of losing control that she gripped tighter and tighter until everything slipped through her fingers. She never learned what Lisa knew instinctively, that things grow better when you tend them with open hands." Old Mr. Mice Anderson, now 85 and still the self-appointed guardian of the farm, stood up. "I was Karen's ally once." He admitted something he'd never said publicly. "She promised me power made me feel important. I reported violations, spy on neighbors. I was a bitter old man who enjoyed making others as miserable as I was." The room was silent. "But then I watched Thompson here lose his wife, keep gardening, keep giving away vegetables even when his heart was breaking. I watched him stand up to Karen not with hatred but with dignity. Made me ashamed, made me want to be better." He looked directly at Robert. "You didn't just stand up to a tyrant. You showed us all how to be human again." The room erupted in emotional applause. Robert felt tears on his cheeks, not of sadness, but of profound gratitude. After the meeting, he walked alone to Lisa's memorial garden. The basil plant she'd planted 8 years ago had been divided and replanted so many times that its descendants grew throughout Willowbrook, each cutting carrying her DNA, her legacy. her love. "We did it, baby," he whispered. "We really did it." A hand touched his shoulder. Nathan stood beside him. "Mom would be so proud." "She is," Robert said with certainty. "Wherever she is, she knows." As they stood there, 3 generations of Thompsons in the garden Lisa had inspired a young couple approached. They were new to the neighborhood, had just bought the old Stevens house where Mike had lived during his surveillance days. "Mr. Thompson," the woman said nervously, "we wanted to thank you. We've heard the stories about what this place used to be like. Thank you for making it safe for families like ours." She placed her hand on her pregnant belly, and Robert understood. New life coming to a community reborn. "Thank your neighbors," he said. "They're the ones who stood up when it mattered." 6 months later, the dedication ceremony for the Community Reconciliation Garden brought unexpected visitors. Karen's ex-husband, Richard, emerged from his self-imposed exile looking healthier than he had in years. "I should have stopped her," he said to Robert. "I saw what she was becoming, and I just hid." "We all do what we can to survive," Robert replied. "You're here now. That matters." Richard had brought something Karen's personal journals from before her HOA presidency, before the corruption and cruelty. "I thought you should see who she was before," he said. "Maybe it will help explain how she became what she did." Robert read them that night. Young Karen had been idealistic, passionate about community service. She'd run for HOA president initially to fight against a previous corrupt board, but power had changed her, twisted her good intentions into authoritarian control. The entries showed the progression from "I want to help" to "I know what's best" to "they need to be controlled" to "they will obey." It was a cautionary tale written in her own hand. Robert shared the journals with Margaret, who wept reading her daughter's descent into darkness. "I gave her everything except boundaries," Margaret said. "I taught her she was special above others, destined to lead. I created the monster she became." "You made mistakes," Robert said gently. "But Karen made choices. We all choose who we become." The Community Reconciliation Garden opened on a perfect spring day. The old Whitmore house had been converted into a community center, its rooms now hosting cooking classes, gardening workshops, and meditation sessions. The basement where Karen had kept her files of dirt on neighbors was now a root cellar storing vegetables for the food bank. James Chen, who'd served his probation faithfully, was there. He'd become the farm's lead landscaper, using his skills for redemption rather than revenge. The community had forgiven him, understanding he'd been another of Karen's victims. "Mr. Thompson," he said, approaching nervously, "I never properly apologized." "You've apologized with your actions," Robert replied. "That's worth more than words." As the celebration continued, Detective Sarah Chen, no relation to the other Chens, arrived with news that sent ripples through the gathering. "We've just arrested 12 HOA presidents across the state based on the investigation methods we developed from the Whitmore case. Your stand against tyranny has exposed a network of corruption we never knew existed." The crowd murmured with amazement. Karen's defeat had started an avalanche that was cleaning out corruption across the state. Nathan, now head of the state's new HOA Crimes Division, added more news. The state legislature just passed the Thompson Act mandatory term limits for HOA boards, regular financial audits, and criminal penalties for harassment. "Dad, you've literally changed the law." Robert felt overwhelmed. He just wanted to sell his house and honor Lisa's memory. Instead, he'd sparked a revolution in community governance. As sunset approached, the gathering took on an almost magical quality. Children played in gardens where fear had once grown. Former enemies shared meals. The Whitmore house, once a fortress of oppression, echoed with laughter and music. Margaret stood in what had been Karen's office, now a library full of gardening books and community resources. "She would have hated this," she said to Robert. "And maybe if she'd lived, she might have eventually understood it was better." "People can change," Robert said. "Look at all of us." The final surprise came as darkness fell. The city had installed a new streetlight at the corner, and a small ceremony was held to dedicate it. The mayor himself attended, reading the plaque, "The Lisa Thompson Memorial Light, illuminating the path from darkness to community." Robert couldn't speak. Nathan accepted on his behalf little Lisa in his arms, the third generation of Thompsons standing in the light that honored the first. "My mother believed in growing things," Nathan said. plants, vegetables, but most importantly, community. This light will remind us that even in the darkest times, one person standing up for what's right can illuminate the way for everyone. As the ceremony ended and people began heading home, Robert noticed someone had planted morning glories around the light pole's base. By next year, they'd climb the pole beauty, wrapping around function, nature, and civilization in harmony. He stood there long after everyone left, just him, and the memory of Lisa and the ghost of Karen Whitmore, two women who'd never met, but whose legacies would be forever intertwined in the story of Willowbrook's transformation. A year later, Hollywood came calling. They wanted to make a movie about the HOA uprising. Robert refused initially, but Nathan convinced him the story could inspire other communities living under tyranny. "But I have conditions," Robert said to the producers. "Karen isn't portrayed as a monster. She's shown as a human who lost her way. And Lisa gets equal billing. This is as much her story as anyone's." The film, The Garden of Democracy, became a surprise hit. The actress playing Karen won an Oscar for portraying her complexity, the fear behind the cruelty, the insecurity behind the power, grabbed the human behind the tyrant. Margaret attended the premiere with Robert and Nathan. When Karen appeared on screen for the first time, she gripped Robert's hand. "Thank you," she whispered, "for letting her be human in the end." The movie's success brought unexpected attention to Willowbrook. Communities worldwide reached out asking how to replicate their transformation. Robert found himself at age 65 becoming an accidental consultant on community organizing and peaceful resistance to tyranny. But he always returned to the farm, to the soil, to the simple act of growing things. That's where he felt Lisa most strongly, in the rhythm of seasons, the patience of seeds, the miracle of growth. One morning, 5 years after the movie, 10 years after Karen's death, Robert made a discovery that brought everything full circle. In the back corner of what had been Karen's yard, now part of the community garden, he found a small, neglected patch where vegetables were growing wild. Investigation revealed that Karen had tried to start her own garden years before, probably inspired by the very beauty she'd later try to ban. Among the overgrowth was a tomato plant clearly descended from seeds that had self-sown year after year. Robert tested the variety. It was one of Lisa's heirlooms, probably spread by birds from his original garden. He stood there looking at this secret garden Karen had hidden, even from herself, and finally understood. She'd wanted what he had: connection to the earth, the satisfaction of growing things, the peace that came from working with nature instead of against it. But she'd been too proud to admit it, too committed to her image of control to embrace the beautiful chaos of gardening. Robert carefully tended the forgotten garden, bringing it back to health. He installed a small plaque, Karen's Garden. Even tyrants dreamed of growing things. Some in the community objected, saying she didn't deserve a memorial, but Robert insisted. Everyone deserves redemption, even if it comes after death. This garden proves she had the capacity for creation, not just destruction. That matters. The final chapter of the story came on Robert's 70th birthday. The entire community gathered for the largest celebration Willowbrook had ever seen. 3 generations of families whose lives had been touched by the transformation attended. Nathan, now chief of police in a nearby city, spoke about his father's courage. Maria, whose bakery had become a regional chain, spoke about his compassion. Even James Chen, married now, with children of his own, spoke about forgiveness and redemption. But the most moving speech came from Margaret, now 83 and frail, but still sharp. "Robert Thompson saved my daughter," she said, causing surprised murmurs. "Not from prison, it was too late for that. But he saved her from being remembered only as a tyrant. He showed that even the worst of us have humanity worth acknowledging. He grew compassion in soil poisoned by hatred." She paused, gathering strength. "Karen wrote me one last letter before she died. She said, 'Tell Thompson he was right. Gardens are better than empires. They last longer and feed more people.' She understood finally at the end. That understanding was Robert's gift to her and to all of us." As the sun set on the celebration, Robert walked through the farm one more time. Every plant told a story. Every garden bed held memory. The basil by the entrance, Lisa's basil, had grown into a magnificent bush that perfumed the entire entrance. Little Lisa, now 7, and the spitting image of her grandmother ran up and took his hand. Grandpa, will you teach me to grow tomatoes like Grandma did? Of course, sweetheart. But first, let me tell you a story about a woman who tried to stop gardens from growing and how her defeat led to more gardens than anyone could have imagined. They sat on a bench overlooking the thriving farm, the old man and the young girl, as Robert began the story one more time. But this time, he told it differently. This time, Karen wasn't the villain, but a lost soul who'd forgotten that the best things in life grow slowly, with patience, in community with others. Did she ever learn? Little Lisa asked. At the very end, yes. And her learning, even though it came too late, helped hundreds of other neighborhoods avoid the same mistakes. Sometimes our failures teach more than our successes. As darkness fell and the automatic lights came on, the farm had them now solar-powered and efficient. Robert could see the full scope of what had grown from that morning he'd put a for sale sign in his yard. A 3-acre farm that fed thousands. A community center that hosted everything from weddings to citizenship ceremonies. A network of gardens throughout Willowbrook that had turned a sterile suburb into an urban oasis. Laws that protected homeowners across the state. A movement that had spread nationwide. All because he'd refused to let a tyrant prevent him from honoring his wife's dying wish. Nathan approached, carrying his sleeping daughter. Ready to head home, Dad? Robert took one last look around. Somewhere he felt Lisa's presence, and strangely, maybe Karen's too. Two women who'd never met, but whose conflict had created something neither could have imagined. You know, he said to Nathan, your mother always said the best fertilizer was bullshit turned into something useful. I think she would have appreciated the irony of all this beauty growing from Karen's manure. Nathan laughed. Only you could find poetry in that, Dad. As they walked home through the gardens, 3 generations of Thompsons, Robert felt complete. The story that had begun with harassment and violation notices had ended with redemption and reconciliation. The last entry in Robert's journal that night was simple. Lisa's dream didn't just survive, it conquered. Not through force or fear, but through patience, persistence, and the radical act of continuing to grow things when someone tried to stop us. Karen Whitmore gave us the gift of opposition, which taught us the power of unity. In trying to destroy one garden, she created thousands. In trying to silence one voice, she amplified hundreds. She lost everything, but gave us everything in the process. May she rest in the peace she never found in life, and may we never forget that gardens grow best when everyone tends them together. The next morning, life continued. Seeds were planted. Vegetables were harvested. Children learned. Communities thrived. And in a federal cemetery 500 miles away, the morning glories someone had secretly planted on Karen Whitmore's grave bloomed for the first time, their purple flowers reaching toward the sun proof that beauty could grow anywhere, even from the darkest soil. The HOA wars were over. The age of community had begun. And somewhere in whatever comes after this life, 2 women who'd never met in life, a nurse who believed in healing through growing things, and a tyrant who'd forgotten how to grow, finally understood each other. The garden had won. It always does in the end. The morning Robert Thompson discovered the break-in at the Thompson Community Agricultural Center started like any other. At 71, he still arrived before dawn, savoring the quiet moments before the farm came alive with volunteers and visitors. But that Tuesday morning, something was wrong. The new greenhouse's door hung open, its lock expertly picked rather than broken. Inside, someone had been through everything, not destroying, but searching. File cabinets stood open, their contents rifled through, but largely intact. The computer in the office had been accessed, its browser history showing someone had searched through 5 years of financial records. Nathan arrived within minutes of Robert's call, his detective instincts immediately engaged. This wasn't random, he said, examining the lock. Professional job. They were looking for something specific. But what? We don't have anything worth stealing except vegetables. Information, maybe. Dad, has anyone been asking questions about the farm lately? Anyone unusual? Robert thought back over the past weeks. There had been one odd interaction, a woman claiming to be a documentary filmmaker, asking detailed questions about the farm's finances, its legal structure, how they'd acquired the additional properties. She said her name was Jennifer Walsh, Robert recalled. Said she was making a film about community resistance, but she seemed more interested in property records than human interest stories. Nathan made a note. I'll run the name, but it's probably fake. This feels like someone's investigating you, Dad. The question is why? The answer came 3 days later in the form of a certified letter from a law firm Robert had never heard of, Blackstone Morrison and Associates. The name Morrison made his blood run cold. The letter was formal, threatening, and devastating in its implications. Dear Mr. Thompson, our clients, the estate of Harold Morrison and affiliated parties are initiating legal action to reclaim properties illegally acquired through conspiracy fraud and racketeering activities. Specifically, the properties formerly owned by Karen Whitmore and David Whitmore were obtained through a criminal conspiracy that our clients contend violated their civil rights and fiduciary interests. We demand immediate cessation of all activities on said properties and prepare for litigation seeking damages in excess of $10 million. Nathan read the letter 3 times, his expression darkening with each pass. Judge Morrison's estate. He died in prison 2 years ago. Who are these affiliated parties? Robert felt a familiar dread settling in his stomach. Just when they thought the past was buried, it was clawing its way back to the surface. Maria arrived within the hour, having received her own letter. So had Tom Bradley, the Patels, and every other person who'd testified against Karen Whitmore. They're trying to relitigate the whole thing, Maria said, her voice shaking with anger, claiming we were all part of some conspiracy to steal property. But we didn't steal anything, Tom protested. The properties were sold legally after Karen went to prison. They're not after the truth, Nathan said grimly. They're after revenge, or money, probably both. The emergency community meeting that night was the largest since Karen's arrest. The community center overflowed with worried faces, whispered concerns, and growing anger. Robert stood before them trying to project calm he didn't feel. We've faced bullies before, he said. We'll face them again. The difference is this time we face them together. But this enemy was different, smarter, better funded, and they'd learned from Karen's mistakes. Within a week, the harassment began. Health inspectors arrived daily, each finding new violations that hadn't existed before. The fire marshal suddenly discovered code issues that required immediate, expensive fixes. The zoning board received anonymous complaints about commercial activities in agricultural zones. They're using the system against us, Nathan observed. Everything technically legal but coordinated to cause maximum damage. Then came the personal attacks. Robert's credit report showed inquiries he hadn't authorized. His bank called about suspicious activity on his accounts. Someone had tried to take out loans in his name. Maria's bakery faced a boycott organized through social media with fake reviews claiming food poisoning. Tom's construction company lost 3 contracts after anonymous tips suggested he used substandard materials. But the worst came when little Lisa, now 8, came home from school crying. Some kid said Grandpa is a thief, she sobbed into Nathan's shoulder. They said he stole people's houses and we're all criminals. That's when Robert understood this wasn't just about property or money. Someone was trying to destroy not just what they'd built, but who they were. The enemy revealed themselves at the next city council meeting. A man in an expensive suit stood to address the council, introducing himself as Harrison Morrison, Judge Morrison's son. My father was wrongfully imprisoned based on lies and conspiracy theories, he said, his voice carrying his father's same authoritative tone. He died in prison, branded a criminal, while the real criminals profited from their conspiracy. He turned to face Robert directly. Mr. Thompson, you orchestrated a campaign that destroyed my family. My father, my aunt, Karen, my uncle David, all imprisoned or dead because of your vendetta. Your father was corrupt, Robert said quietly. Your aunt was a tyrant. They destroyed themselves. So you say, but I have evidence that suggests otherwise. Harrison pulled out a folder. Affidavits from former residents saying they were coerced into testifying, financial records showing suspicious payments around the time of the trial, a pattern of conspiracy that makes Watergate look amateur. The documents were masterfully crafted lies, mixing just enough truth with fabrication to seem plausible. Several council members looked troubled. I'm not here for revenge, Harrison continued. I'm here for justice, and to warn this community that the hero you've elevated is nothing but a clever criminal who destroyed my family for profit. The meeting erupted in chaos. Supporters of Robert shouted down Harrison's lies, but a seed of doubt had been planted. Some newer residents who hadn't lived through Karen's reign began asking questions. That night, Robert couldn't sleep. He stood in Lisa's memorial garden seeking guidance from the memory of his wife. "I don't know how to fight this," he admitted to the darkness. Karen was obvious in her evil. "This is subtle, sophisticated. How do I fight lies that sound like truth?" The basil plant rustled in a breeze that touched nothing else, and Robert could almost hear Lisa's voice. Truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to stand. The next morning brought an unexpected ally. Richard Whitmore, Karen's ex-husband, arrived at the farm with boxes of documents. "I heard Harrison Morrison was causing trouble," he said without preamble. "I thought you might need these." The boxes contained Karen's real journals, not the sanitized ones Richard had shared years ago, but the complete set, including recordings she'd made of conversations with Judge Morrison planning their criminal enterprise. "She was paranoid," Richard explained, "recorded everything in case her partners turned on her. I kept them hidden thinking they'd died with her. But if Harrison wants to rewrite history..." Nathan listened to the recordings with growing excitement. "This is it. This proves everything. Karen and Morrison explicitly discussing the conspiracy, the money laundering, all of it. But when they brought the recordings to the district attorney, they hit a wall. The recordings were made without consent," the DA said. "They're inadmissible, and given that all parties in them are dead, they can't be authenticated." "So Harrison can lie with impunity?" Nathan demanded. "I'm afraid so, unless you can prove his current actions constitute harassment or conspiracy." The war of attrition continued. Every day brought new challenges, surprise inspections, legal threats, social media campaigns, painting Robert as a villain who'd destroyed a prominent family. The stress began showing. Volunteers stopped coming to the farm. Donations dried up. The hospital contract came under review after anonymous complaints about association with criminal elements. Margaret, now 84 and frail, was devastated. "My daughter's evil is still poisoning everything," she wept. "Even in death, she destroys." But Harrison had made one crucial mistake. He'd hired the same private investigator who'd broken into the farm. Jennifer Walsh was indeed fake, but the real investigator, Marcus Webb, had a history. Nathan discovered it through patient detective work. Webb had been involved in 3 similar cases, families of convicted criminals trying to rehabilitate their relatives' reputations through harassment and litigation. "It's a pattern," Nathan told the assembled legal team they'd been forced to hire. "He finds families with money and grievance, convinces them they were wronged, then orchestrates these campaigns. He takes a percentage of any settlement. Can we prove it? Working on it." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. James Chen, the landscaper, who'd been Karen's unwilling accomplice, had been doing his own investigation. "I felt I owed you," he told Robert. "After what I did, I needed to make amends, so I've been watching Harrison Morrison, following him." What James had discovered was shocking. Harrison had been meeting with other disgraced HOA presidents from around the state, organizing them into a coalition. They called themselves the Property Rights Alliance, but their real goal was to reverse the reforms that had followed Karen's downfall. "They want to bring back the old system," James said, "the one where HOAs had unlimited power. Harrison's promising them protection and legal support if they help him destroy you first." The recordings James had made of these meetings were completely legal. They'd taken place in public restaurants. And they were damning. "Once we destroy Thompson and his little garden project," Harrison's voice was clear on the recording, "we'll have proven that the so-called reforms were based on lies. Every HOA in the state will go back to the way things were, the way they should be." Nathan took the recordings to the FBI. Within days, a new investigation was opened not just into Harrison, but into the entire Property Rights Alliance. But Harrison wasn't finished. If he couldn't win legally, he'd win through fear. The attacks became physical. Windows broken at the farm, vehicles vandalized. Maria's bakery was set on fire, fortunately after hours, but the message was clear. Then came the night that changed everything. Robert was working late in the greenhouse when he heard footsteps, multiple sets trying to be quiet. He reached for his phone to call 911, but the lights went out. In the darkness, he heard Harrison's voice. "Mr. Thompson, we need to talk." "The police are on their way." No, they're not. Cell towers jammed. Landlines cut. It's just us. Figures emerged from the shadows. 5 men, including Harrison and Marcus Webb. I'm not going to hurt you, Harrison said. I'm not my aunt. But you're going to sign some documents, confession documents, admitting you conspired against my family. Never. I thought you'd say that. Harrison pulled out his phone, showing a video feed. Recognize this house. It was Nathan's home. Through the window, Robert could see his son's family having dinner, unaware they were being watched. One call, Harrison said, and my associates pay them a visit. Your son's tough, but is he tough enough to protect his family against 5 professionals? Robert's blood turned to ice. You wouldn't. I'm not a killer, Thompson, but accidents happen. Break-ins go wrong, especially when off-duty cops try to be heroes. The threat hung in the air like poison gas. Robert looked at the document's detailed confessions that would destroy everything they'd built, paint Karen as a victim, and justify returning the properties to the Morrison estate. If I sign, you leave, tonight, never come back. The farm closes. Your son keeps his job but stops investigating. Everyone goes back to their lives. Robert picked up the pen, his hand shaking. Everything they'd built, everything they'd fought for, about to be destroyed by 5 men in the dark. That's when the lights exploded back on, and the greenhouse was suddenly full of FBI agents. Harrison Morrison, you're under arrest for conspiracy extortion and making terroristic threats. Harrison spun around confused as agents surrounded his men. Nathan walked in wearing a wire, followed by Detective Chen. Did you really think we didn't know? Nathan asked. We've been watching you for weeks. Every meeting, every plan. The cell tower isn't jammed. We just made you think it was. As Harrison was cuffed, he stared at Robert with naked hatred. This isn't over. You destroyed my family. No, Robert said quietly. Your family destroyed itself, just like you just did. The arrest of Harrison Morrison and the Property Rights Alliance made national news. The conspiracy to restore HOA tyranny, the extortion attempt, the threats against children, it all came out. The trial was swift. Harrison got 15 years. Marcus Webb got 10. The other conspirators received various sentences. But the real victory came when the state legislature, horrified by how close they'd come to losing the reforms, passed the Community Garden Protection Act. It made community agricultural projects, protected entities, immune from HOA interference, and guaranteed public funding. At the ceremony where the governor signed the bill, he asked Robert to speak. We've learned that freedom requires constant vigilance, Robert said. Tyranny doesn't die, it just waits for us to become complacent. But as long as communities stand together, as long as we remember that our strength comes from unity, not authority, we'll prevail. The applause was thunderous, but Robert's mind was elsewhere. On Lisa, whose death had started this journey. On Karen, whose tyranny had catalyzed change. On Harrison, whose vendetta had ultimately strengthened the very reforms he'd tried to destroy. Funny how hatred keeps defeating itself, Nathan observed. It's not funny, Robert corrected. It's hopeful. It means love really is stronger. 3 months after Harrison's conviction, an unexpected visitor arrived at the farm. A young woman, mid-20s, nervous but determined. Mr. Thompson, I'm Ashley Morrison. Harrison is my older brother. Robert tensed, but she held up her hands. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here to apologize, and maybe to help. She explained that she'd been estranged from her family for years, had watched in horror as her father and brother descended into corruption and vendetta. I'm in law school now. Environmental law. I want to help communities create sustainable agriculture. I know it doesn't make up for what my family did, but maybe I can be part of the solution instead of the problem. Robert studied her for a long moment, then extended his hand. Everyone deserves a chance to choose who they'll be. Welcome to the farm. Ashley Morrison became one of the farm's most dedicated volunteers, eventually providing free legal services to help other communities establish their own agricultural centers. The revelation that Ashley Morrison had joined the farm sent ripples through the community. Some saw it as the ultimate reconciliation, a Morrison choosing to heal rather than harm. Others remained suspicious, wondering if this was another elaborate scheme. Margaret was the most affected. She sat with Ashley in the garden one afternoon, 2 women bound by the sins of their families. Your aunt was my daughter, Margaret said simply. I failed her. My father and brother failed themselves, Ashley replied, but we don't have to repeat their mistakes. It was the beginning of an unlikely friendship that would prove crucial in the battles ahead. Because the battles were far from over. The Property Rights Alliance might have been dismantled, but its ideology had spread like a virus through certain segments of society. Online forums sprouted defending Karen Whitmore as a martyr for property rights. Harrison Morrison became a cult figure from his prison cell, writing manifestos about the Communist Garden conspiracy. More concerning were the copycat incidents. HOA presidents in other states, emboldened by the narrative of persecution, began cracking down harder on their communities. The reforms that had spread after Karen's fall faced backlash from those who saw them as weakness. Robert found himself reluctantly thrust into a national spotlight as the face of the community garden movement. Speaking engagements, congressional testimony, media interviews, all pulling him away from the simple act of growing vegetables that had started everything. I never wanted to be a symbol, he confided to Nathan one evening. I just wanted to honor your mother's memory. Maybe that's why you're the perfect symbol, Nathan replied. You didn't seek power. It found you because you stood against those who abused it. The farm had evolved into something beyond Robert's wildest imagination. 3 satellite locations had opened across the state, each run by people who'd learned the Willowbrook model. The Thompson Agricultural Institute, as the state had officially designated it, trained hundreds of community organizers annually. But success brought new challenges. Marcus Chen James's younger brother and a recent business school graduate approached Robert with a proposal that sparked heated debate. We could franchise the model, Marcus suggested. Thompson community farms across the nation. Standardized practices, quality control, sustainable funding through licensing fees. Maria was appalled. That's exactly the kind of corporatization Karen would have loved. We'd become the thing we fought against. Or we'd spread the revolution faster than ever, Tom Bradley countered. Imagine 1,000 communities with their own farms in 5 years instead of 50 years. The community was split. Old-timers who'd lived through Karen's reign feared any concentration of power. Newcomers saw opportunity for rapid expansion of the movement. Robert struggled with the decision. Lisa would have known what to do, would have found the wisdom in the middle path. But Lisa was gone, and he was just a 72-year-old farmer trying to navigate waters far deeper than he'd ever imagined. The answer came from an unexpected source, Karen's journals, the complete ones Richard had provided. Ashley had been studying them as part of her thesis on power corruption in community organizations. Look at this entry, she showed Robert, from when she first became HOA president. The entry dated 15 years ago read, "The key to lasting power isn't force, it's systemization. Create a model that replicates itself, that makes people dependent on the structure rather than the individual. That's how you build an empire that survives its founder." She was planning to franchise her HOA model, Ashley explained. Before she got drunk on local power, she had ambitions for a national network of HOAs all operating under her system. Robert felt chilled. They were standing at the same crossroads. Karen had faced local success with the potential for national expansion. The difference was the mission, but was that enough? The debate raged for months. Community meetings grew heated. Old alliances strained. Some accused Robert of becoming too cautious, others of being naive about the need for growth. Then came the incident that forced a decision. In Portland, Oregon, a community tried to recreate the Willowbrook model without proper understanding or support. They fought their HOA won, established a garden, but without the hard-learned lessons of Willowbrook, it devolved into chaos. Different factions claimed different plots, arguments over organic versus conventional methods turned violent, and eventually the city shut it down. The headlines were brutal: "Community Garden Experiment Fails Spectacularly," and "Is the Thompson Model Fundamentally Flawed?" Harrison Morrison, from his prison cell, issued a statement. "This proves what I've always said: destroy legitimate authority, and you get chaos. My Aunt Karen understood that order requires hierarchy." The blowback was severe. 3 communities that had been considering the model backed out. The state legislature threatened to review the Community Garden Protection Act. Everything they'd built seemed suddenly fragile. Robert called an emergency meeting not just of Willowbrook, but of all the satellite communities. Over 300 people gathered in what had once been Karen's house, now the community center. "We're at a turning point," Robert began. We can either remain small and pure, risking that our model dies with us, or we can grow risking that we become what we fought against. I don't have the answer, but I know this: we decide together, or we've already lost. The debate that followed was democracy at its messiest and most beautiful. Elderly residents who remembered tyranny argued with young idealists who'd never experienced it. Pragmatists clashed with purists. But through it all, there was respect, the kind Karen had never fostered. Finally, Maria proposed a solution that would become known as the Willowbrook Compromise. "We don't franchise," she said. "We federate. Each community garden remains completely independent, but we create a support network. Shared resources, shared learning, but no central authority. Like the internet, connected but not controlled." "How do we ensure quality without control?" Marcus asked. Ashley stood up. "Through covenant, not contract. Communities that join agree to core principles: transparency, rotation of leadership, community ownership. But how they implement those principles is up to them. And if they violate the principles, then the network withdraws support. No lawsuits, no force, just the natural consequence of breaking communal trust." The vote was close, 167 for 134 against, with several abstentions. But it passed. The Federation of Community Gardens was born that night with a charter written not by lawyers but by gardeners, not in legalese but in plain language anyone could understand. The first principle: no individual or group shall hold power over the garden for more than 2 years consecutively. The second: all financial records shall be as open as the garden itself. The third: the purpose of growing is sharing, not hoarding. There were 21 principles in total, each born from hard-learned lessons from Karen's tyranny and its aftermath. Robert was elected the first coordinator, a role he accepted with the caveat that he would serve only 1 year to establish the precedent of rotation. The Federation model worked better than anyone had hoped. Within 2 years, over 200 communities had joined. Each remained unique, some focused on vegetables, others on flowers, some on herbs for medical purposes, but all shared the core commitment to community over control. The success attracted attention from unexpected quarters. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, a sociologist from Harvard, arrived to study what she called the Willowbrook phenomenon. "You've created something that shouldn't exist," she told Robert, "a scalable model that resists centralization. It violates everything we know about organizational growth." "Maybe what you know is wrong," Robert suggested gently. She laughed. "Maybe it is. Mind if I stick around to find out?" Dr. Warren's research would eventually become a landmark book, Gardens of Democracy: How One Community's Fight Against Tyranny Revolutionized American Civic Life. But not everyone was pleased with the Federation's success. The Corporate Agriculture Alliance, representing major agricultural companies, saw the community garden movement as a threat to their business model. If communities could feed themselves, what need was there for industrial agriculture? Their attack was sophisticated, not direct confrontation, but regulatory capture. They lobbied for laws requiring agricultural operations to meet standards that small gardens couldn't possibly achieve, soil testing that cost thousands, insurance requirements that would bankrupt volunteer operations, zoning restrictions that classified community gardens as commercial operations. It was Karen's playbook amplified to a national scale. The Federation faced its greatest crisis. Communities that had thrived were suddenly illegal. Gardens that had fed thousands were ordered closed. Robert, now 73 and tired, considered admitting defeat. The forces arrayed against them were too powerful, too entrenched. But then something beautiful happened. The communities fought back not with anger, but with vegetables. They held illegal farmers markets on the steps of state capitals. They delivered fresh produce to legislators' offices with notes, "This is what you're making illegal." Children drew pictures of their gardens and mailed them to Congress. The movement went viral. Hash gardens. Are not crimes trended globally. Celebrities posted photos from their local community gardens. Even some corporate executives, perhaps remembering their own grandparents' victory gardens, began questioning the alliance's position. The tipping point came when a photo surfaced of a SWAT team raiding a community garden in Detroit, destroying vegetables while children watched in tears. The officer leading the raid was wearing gear more suited for a drug bust than code enforcement. The public backlash was immediate and overwhelming. Within weeks, the Corporate Agriculture Alliance withdrew their proposed regulations. Several states passed right-to-garden amendments to their constitutions. The federal government established a Department of Community Agriculture with a mandate to support, not suppress, local food production. Robert was invited to the White House for the signing of the Community Food Security Act. As he stood in the Rose Garden watching the president sign legislation that would protect community gardens nationally, he thought of Lisa. "We did it, baby," he whispered. "We really did it." But the moment of triumph was interrupted by his phone buzzing. Nathan was calling, and his voice was urgent. "Dad, you need to come home, now." "What's wrong?" "It's Margaret. She's in the hospital. She's asking for you." Robert left immediately, his Medal of Honor forgotten in his hotel room. Margaret lay in the hospital bed looking fragile but alert. At 86, she'd outlived her daughter, seen her family's empire crumble, and helped rebuild something better from its ashes. "Robert," she said, her voice weak but clear, "I need to tell you something. About Karen. About why she became what she became." Robert sat beside her, taking her weathered hand. "When Karen was 7, Margaret began. She watched her father destroy a neighbor over a property dispute. He was a lawyer, brilliant but cruel. He took everything from that family, their home, their savings, their dignity. Karen watched it all. She paused, gathering strength. That night she came to me crying. "Why did Daddy hurt them?" she asked. I should have told her it was wrong. Instead I said, because he could, because he was stronger. I taught her that power was about domination. By the time I realized my mistake, it was too late. She'd internalized it completely. Tears ran down Margaret's cheeks. I created the monster she became. Every family she destroyed, every person she hurt, that's my legacy too. "You're not responsible for her choices," Robert said gently. "But I am responsible for not stopping her, for enabling her, for being proud when she was elected HOA president, because it meant my daughter was powerful." She gripped his hand tighter. "Promise me something." "Anything." "Tell the story. The whole story. Not just Karen the tyrant, but Karen the child who learned the wrong lessons. Help people understand how tyrants are made so they can prevent making more." "I promise." Margaret smiled weakly. "And Robert, thank you. For stopping her when I couldn't. For saving her from becoming even worse. For giving our family a chance at redemption through Ashley." She died that night peacefully, with Ashley holding one hand and Robert holding the other. The funeral was larger than anyone expected. The entire community came not to mourn the mother of a tyrant, but to honor a woman who'd found courage late in life to stand against what her daughter had become. Ashley spoke at the service. Margaret Chen, she took our neighbor's name as her own, taught us that it's never too late to choose differently, that the sins of our children don't have to define us, that redemption is possible even at the end. As they lowered Margaret's casket, someone no one would ever admit who began planting flower bulbs around the grave. Within minutes, dozens of people were planting, turning the burial site into a garden. "She would have loved this," Ashley said through tears. 6 months later, Ashley made a discovery that changed everything they thought they knew about Karen's story. Going through Margaret's effects, she found a safety deposit box key. Inside the box were documents that revealed the full scope of Karen's father's corruption and something else. Karen had tried to expose him. At age 25, before she'd married Richard, before the HOA, she'd gathered evidence of her father's crimes and tried to report him. But he'd used his connections to bury the investigation and had Karen briefly committed to a psychiatric facility to discredit her. The record showed she'd spent 3 months institutionalized, diagnosed with delusional disorder, for accusing a respected lawyer of crimes. The treatment had been harsh medications that left her docile therapy sessions that convinced her that standing against authority was a form of mental illness. She came out different, Richard confirmed when shown the documents. Harder. She said, "If you can't beat power, become it." The revelation recast Karen's story. She hadn't started as a tyrant, but as a whistleblower crushed by the very system she'd later manipulate. Her father had taught her that power corrupts, then proved it by destroying her for trying to hold him accountable. Robert shared the discovery with the Federation, sparking a difficult conversation about justice, power, and cycles of abuse. "It doesn't excuse what she did," Maria said carefully, "but it explains it." More importantly, Ashley added, It shows how systems of power protect themselves by destroying those who challenge them. Karen became the monster because she couldn't beat the monster. The Federation decided to create the Margaret and Karen Whitmore Memorial Fund, not celebrating them, but using their story to educate about power corruption and the importance of accountability systems that don't destroy the people they are meant to protect.